video is going to serve as a notification as well as an introduction for an upcoming video series I'll be doing on religious experience. Now, religious experience, as seen through secular and modern culture today, often contrives it as deflated or as an inconsequential point in the larger discussion of God's existence or whether he is involved in our world. Yet, as a common view as this is, I would suggest that any view that chortles at such events and experiences misunderstands the very power of these events. From a practical standpoint, we can expect any person who adheres to a theistic worldview to encounter some sort of contact with the God that they serve. Thus, it would follow that if there were no genuine experiences with such a being, then this fact alone would not only cheapen, but seem to dismantle the believer's devotion to their beliefs. However, this certainly is not the case, as the majority of theists do undergo religious experiences. Thus, such events require some explanation, and arguably some sort of justification. The Christian philosopher William Altson writes, quote, "Nevertheless, if I could not find any confirmation of the Christian message in my own experience, I would be less justified in accepting that message than I am in fact. To generalize the point, suppose that no one had ever experienced communion with God, had ever heard God speaking to him or her, had ever felt the strengthening influence of the Holy Spirit in a difficult situation. In that case, Christian belief would be a less rational stance than it is in fact." End quote. Now, some obvious questions arise from the get-go when we start speaking of religious experiences. For example, should we treat such experiences vertical? Or are such experiences properly justifying via checking procedures? Or even, can a Christian's belief in God be properly basic? These questions kind of serve as a framework and a funneling for the content that I'll be using in this paper and in the subsequent portions to follow. Now, William Lane Craig often makes a distinction between someone knowing their faith and belief to be true and someone showing their belief to be true. The former deals with justification and the grounding of that belief, while the latter deals more with the arguments for God's existence. Hence, this paper will be subdivided into 5 sections. First, the introduction you are currently watching. Second, the epistemic justification of religious belief. Third, a modified argument initially written by an atheist, William Rowe. Fourth, a second argument that argues that God is the best explanation for such religious experiences. And finally, while several objections will be considered in the previous sections already mentioned, the last part will deal with objections to religious experience exclusively. Now, before I end this introduction, I would like to accomplish 2 additional ends. First, I would like to define and exemplify some key terms. And second, I would like to defend the principle of credulity. So let's get started. Proceed with the definition of terms. Now, there are 3 terms that I would like to define, namely 1, religious experience, 2, vertical, and 3, the principle of credulity. Now, by religious experience, I mean an experience that the subject takes to be of God or some supernatural being or state of affairs. Now, there's a lot of different examples of this. I've listed 5 in the description for you to take a look at. Next, by vertical, I mean that the religious experience was trustworthy or it actually happened. Lastly, the principle of credulity can be worded many ways, but for our purposes I will define it as follows. It is rational to treat our experiences, including religious experience, as innocent until proven guilty. Finally, I would like to end this introduction with a brief defense of the principle of credulity. There are at least 2 ways to defend the principle of credulity, namely 1, by examining the practical rationality of the principle, and 2, by creating an argument from impartiality. We'll take each of these in turn. First, the implication of rejection of the principle of credulity seems to have stifling consequences that generalize to other experiences, for example, memory, belief, sensory experience, etc. Atheist William Rowe, who will be making an appearance in Part 3, advises against the rejection of this principle. If the principle of credulity is rejected, then all experiences, whether religious or not, should be judged guilty until proven innocent. Such a move would entail skepticism with regard to a great deal of what we think or know about the world. However, if we retain the principle of credulity with regard to non-religious experience, but reject it with respect to religious experience, our move will appear arbitrary. Altson argues that there isn't any way to provide a non-circular or question-begging proof for any of our socially established assumptions of experience, again, like sensory experience, mental experience, emotional, memory experience, religious experience, etc., if we reject the principle of credulity. Altson goes on to suggest that we can't suspend those docetic practices because it would be extremely costly, nor can we replace the current practices because the new practices will do no better. Example, Rowe's addition of checking procedures. Rather, it is reasonable for us to form beliefs in the way we usually do. Thus, the principle of credulity is practically rational. Second, we can create an argument for the principle of credulity from an argument of impartiality. See the description for those premises. Now, if we let premise 1 go, i.e. the impartiality thesis, then effectively we abandon any rationality in discourse, example legal reasoning, literary criticism, philosophy, etc., and erect a system that treats our experiences arbitrarily. Moreover, it would be extremely difficult to relate experiences within epistemology, because if we have to discuss whether every single perceptual claim is trustworthy and which attitude we should adopt to this or that experience, then epistemology would be very, very difficult to do. Likewise, a rejection of premise 2, i.e. the applicability thesis, would result in a circular argument. Take sensory experience, for example. You see a ball, and that experience is justified by inductive evidence. Example, memory, recalling what the ball is. Yet such an induction from memory is only justified if we can use memory experiences vertically or trustworthy. But what grounds, if we reject premise 2, do we have for suggesting that we can hold to vertical memory beliefs? This is a circular argument. The third premise, i.e. the seamless web thesis, should also not be rejected. Suppose someone rejects this premise by saying that we can distinguish relevant and non-relevant experiences void of the principle of credulity. However, such a suggestion cannot be justified because this discrimination violates premise 2, the applicability thesis. Thus, due to the prima facie nature of the premises and their relation to one another, the partiality argument gives further justification to the principle of credulity. Thus ends the introduction. The next section will deal with religious experience as a belief-forming disposition.